So, I'm Arty. I don't really think I need to introduce myself anymore with you guys. So I'm going to talk to you about cognitive biases today. I have 5 stories for you that I personally witnessed over the course of my 3-odd years here and in previous jobs and in presentations online and you name it. These 5 stories have one special theme running through them, and it's not going to be very difficult to figure out what it is. Also, I would like to preface my talk with this. I've never worked with stupid people or malicious people or untalented people. In fact, I've always worked with extremely talented, motivated, and passionate people. But cognitive biases are weird, and don't think that these stories are there to diss anybody or show any sort of disrespect. But as humans, we are not cold, logical, unthinking machines. We have ways of cutting the workload on the brain and getting rid of all those decisions that we need to make. Like if I had to make every single decision consciously throughout every single day at work, I would go insane. So our brain got really, really good at cutting corners. And these kind of behaviors ingrain themselves into your psyche as cognitive biases. And we all do them, and if you think that you don't do them, there's a cognitive bias for that. So the first story is this one, and I heard that so many times. We tested this in 2012, it wasn't very successful, let's never think about it again. And it's like, why? Like, what exactly went wrong? Anyway, so I was reading this book on the left. It's called Information Architecture for the World Wide Web. It was released in 2006. It's quite an old book, especially in a fast-moving world of technology and digital services. So I was sitting there reading it, and my friend came over and he's like, "Oh, have you seen this other book? It's new." Okay, cool, it's new, but what's the difference? Is it actually any better? I was like, yeah, it's new. It was only like 4 years ago it was released. It's obviously better. But actually I read both of those books, and apart from really fancy examples with mobiles, the concepts are exactly the same. Like, how do you innovate in information architecture? There are only so many ways. You look for information, you compartmentalize information in your brain. So all the concepts from that older book still stood, the same as the new one, minus a couple of examples. And this is an interesting example of chronological snobbery. So our brain is wired to think that new things are better than old things. And you can see it everywhere. You can see it in Apple, any mobile phones, like a new mobile phone comes out and everybody's like, "Oh, my phone is so old, 1 year old, and it's lagging and it's horrible, and I need to buy this new model." But you see that in the world of tech as well. But actually, let me rewind. If you ask anybody what is the most influential invention of the 20th century, most people are likely to say the internet. But actually, I would argue that things like the transistor, the washing machine, the airplane, the radio, they made massive socio-economical changes throughout the world, and it changed how we see certain things and how we travel and how we live. So the internet only came there at the end, and actually it's not that massive in comparison. And in the world of design, we can see things like, carousels are bad. People don't use them. People see them as adverts and they don't know how to work them on mobile. But actually that was the case in, a few years back. People learned how to use carousels. People learned that you click on that little button and the thing floats across. It's not bad. But we tested it back in 2015, 2014. It didn't work, and now what do you know? We have it on our homepage on MoneySuperMarket, and it works fine, clearly, because it's still there. So, what I'm getting at with this story is that if you see this behavior, if you have an idea, if you need to test something and people say, "Oh, we tested it back then, and it didn't work, so there's no point in testing it again," just question it. what exactly went wrong? What was the data? Was there something that, were the market conditions right? People understand what you're trying to say to them? Is there something that you can salvage from that older test? But yes, ask why. Why did it work? This is another good one. But everybody knows that users don't click on blah. I joined a new team a while back, and I was so keen to make a good impression because people didn't really believe in design at that time, in UX design. And I pulled in a lot of data, we did some testing for months and months and months, we did testing, and then I produced this amazing, beautiful report that I shared with the team, and people totally loved it. It got shared around, and then I completely forgot about it. We kind of got on with our lives, we started doing other things. And then something weird happened. That report kind of grew. There was a reaction. It was kind of went, oh, and then shared this way and there, and then somehow some people up there got hold of that report, and then some marketing people over there, and then it was everywhere. And we were running a design sprint, and somebody said, oh yeah, but everybody knows that this happens. And I was like, yeah, okay, sounds about right. I heard that somewhere. And then I realized that report I wrote 3 months ago, it grew and grew and grew. It became like this rule of thumb, and this rule of thumb became the law, and then, became the law, and then it just got quoted without any context. It became just general knowledge. And that's very dangerous because that piece of information, there's a saying that, with a man with a hammer, everything is a nail. It just got applied randomly to everything, and people forgot where it came from and how it came about. So this is something called anchoring. And anchoring is the tendency to anchor on the first piece of information you receive about the topic. So how do you deal with that behavior? You need to question it. When somebody says, but it's general knowledge that people don't click on carousels, you say, okay, why? Where did it come from? How do you know? What were your sources? I need 5 quotes, Harvard referenced, that kind of stuff. Maybe not as drastic. So this is an interesting quote as well. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. I don't need to look at your data. I'm just going with this thing. And imagine, 5 years ago, you're this lone decision maker, product manager or something manager, design manager, whatever. And you don't really have much support from any insights or data or user research. So you kind of get used to making decisions, running with your gut. And you become really, really good at making decisions with your gut, and you start to trust your gut because generally, you're a pretty switched on person, you know the market conditions, you know your users, you are one of those users, and then you just continue with that kind of line of thinking. And years go by, and sometimes you make mistakes, and sometimes you make quite expensive mistakes that happen, at the very end of the process, and you have to revert stuff. But generally, overall, it always works itself out. Is that real?
No.
And then, when you suddenly have a bigger team around you, like analysts and then user researchers, user designers, they start giving you all this stuff, but it's not quite right. You kind of start to realize that your gut tells you otherwise. And all this random data and all that kind of stuff is kind of just trash, to be honest. So there's 3 things there. There is a bit of overconfidence, because you kind of think, it was okay in the past, I'll just run with it. There is this confirmation bias, because when you actually are given some of that data, you will go away to Google Analytics and you find the data that exactly fits your argument. Doesn't matter what this thing there is. And then the final one is so deeply rooted in our everyday lives. The Semmelweis reflex is when you reactionary, very kind of knee-jerk reaction. You tend to deny anything new. And the bit about Semmelweis reflex is that it existed forever. You know, there is a story about some scientists back in the day that completely refused to believe in a theory, and then it's only when the whole board of senior scientists changed and new scientists got put in place instead of them, that theory got properly tested, got funding, and then became a thing. I can't quite remember what theory it is. Yeah, you kind of need to question that behavior. If somebody tells you off the bat, no, I'm not listening to your data, or we have data to support it otherwise, kind of try and dig deeper into that. What kind of data? Where did you get it from? What were the circumstances of you getting that data? What was the sample size? And so on. But you need to be super subtle about that as well, because as humans, we have egos, and if we get questioned, we have a tendency to get very defensive. That's another bias, but let's not go into that. So be very subtle. Ask questions like why, how, can you explain this idea to me a little bit better? I've been in this country for 16 years. I still use the, it must be, lost in translation. Can you just, I have an A in higher English. That's not how I remember it. This is not my story, but I have the person's permission to tell it. It was maybe 6 years ago, back when design was non-existent and we didn't really have this kind of relationship with the rest of the product. We were the only 2 user researchers on the team, and we were quite new and we were quite keen to prove our benefit and our value to the company. So that equaled to lots of pressure. So we had a ton of stakeholders that were pulling us in different directions and asking us to do stuff. There were only 2 of us, which equaled, see if somebody gets it, to a lot of pressure. Thank you. Anyway, I just totally lost my train of thought there because of that. So that was a lot of pressure, and we were very, very keen to prove otherwise. So when this big project came in our lab, we were really, really excited. We wanted to really, do a proper job of it. So we went away. This big feature went online. We went away to test it, and so many things started to pop up, like usability issues, understanding issues. People just did not get what they were trying to do there. And we were like, this is amazing. This is going to prove ourselves as this amazing, user research thing. So we published the report, we wrote it up, and we sent it away. And then the person who was kind of supporting us on that level, they went back to us and they went, see that you shouldn't have done that. That's not, but you said we could do it and it's going to be amazing. It's like, that's not quite how I remember it. Now, this person probably had a lot of reasons to go back on their support and then what they said before. So we can't really judge them too harshly. But this illustrates an important bias that's at play there, and it's the consistency bias. So it's basically incorrectly remembering something that you said in the past and kind of saying, I don't quite remember that I said that thing back then, just to be consistent with what you believe today. So the solution these guys came up with was quite genius. Before going out and testing things, they actually started testing it on the stakeholders. So before every user study that was out in labs, they would bring in the stakeholders in the room, they would do exactly the same test with exactly the same discussion guide, and then record them. And something was at play there. This is like a little bonus bias. Hawthorne effect. Basically, when you're on camera, you tend to behave differently. Like I have a camera pointing at me right now, I've not looked at it once. It's just weird, it freaks me out. So when people actually are on camera, they got their opinions and they got their things, and then when way later these people kind of went, that's not how I remember it. They kind of went, but this is how we remember it, click. and they saw themselves and they kind of felt bad about it. So that was quite a drastic measure, and it was definitely needed at that time. But I think when I met this bias in the past, the secret is to just kind of ask lots of questions again and question it. But even more so than with the previous one, you need to be very, very, very subtle, because that's, at this point, you're kind of questioning the person's inner workings and their very, very personal feelings and kind of the way they're wired up. So you need to be even more cautious. Otherwise, you might, offend somebody or. So this one is a bit of a improv session for me, because I was going to tell you more about another bias, but this literally happened a few weeks back, and it was just so perfect that I just needed to tell you. Basically, we were sitting in a room, this big inception meeting and a briefing and a kickoff, and we're kind of looking at some of the back-end systems for money, and we're redesigning them. There's a lot of data floating around. It's quite difficult to use. Not going to go into that, but the main thing was this conversation, and I'll explain these icons in a second. So this conversation went brilliantly. We were sitting at this table, and it went something like this. So you need to compile a huge email to go to the providers, outlining everything that's going on with the channels. Yes. But they also get an automated feed from the third-party source that tells them exactly the same thing. Yes. Why? And at that point, the guy's face just totally changed. He just dropped and kind of went, oh. And everybody in the room laughed. And it was amazing. I just had to include it. They had this kind of status quo, this process on for such a long time that nobody actually questioned it ever. And that was literally the first time anybody actually thought about it and went, oh, wait a second. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. There's another story that's very, very, very similar. It's allegedly happened. It didn't actually, it's been proven that it's somebody made it up in a book a long time ago, but there's this really famous monkey experiment where they had a bunch of monkeys in a room. They had a ladder, and on top of the ladder they had some bananas. And the monkeys went up to get the bananas, and every single time a monkey went up, everybody else got zapped with electricity. And at that point, after a little while, all the monkeys would pull the other monkey down and beat it up so it wouldn't go up there. And at the end, nobody ever went to get the bananas. So they stopped zapping monkeys, and they replaced one monkey with a new monkey. And that new monkey obviously kind of went, oh, look, bananas. Went up, got beaten up, and never went up the ladder again. So they replaced more and more monkeys until no original monkey remained, and nobody went up the ladder, and nobody knew why, but there were bananas, and So this is, you can call it different things. It's called the bandwagon effect. The bandwagon effect is more to do with kind of the business side of things. So hey, Compare the Market had this test running, and now it's gone. Let's do the same test. Microsoft just invested 2,000 billion into AI. Let's just dump money into AI. Why? I don't know. Microsoft are doing it. Let's buy Bitcoin. That's another one. And the kind of the deeper one, it's about kind of personal behavior, is the system justification. So there's a bit of text there, but you essentially get it. Whatever happens to question your system of beliefs or the existing status quo, people are going to defend it. And sometimes people tend to defend it even without thinking about what it actually is. So, how do you deal with all this stuff? Yeah. But again, be subtle. Ask very kind of subtle questions. Why is that? Why is this? Why are we doing that? There was a story my girlfriend told me, yesterday I think. They hired somebody for customer services, and this person just asked too many questions. Every single, I would start saying something to you, and 2 words in, she'd be like, and why is that? Can you do it this other way? And after about 2 weeks of trying to train this person, they kind of just went, look, this is not working out. So be subtle. If you want to change something, start with yourself. you need to change things very, very slowly. Otherwise, people might get offended. So this is it. This was the final story. And what was I getting at with all this? We're humans. We're fallible. We're not very logical. We tend to do things just for the sake of doing things, and we don't think about our actions. But when you want to do this kind of root cause analysis and you want to change something, you need to start with yourself. You need to start asking yourself these questions. Why am I doing it this way? Am I 100% sure that there are no biases in play? In fact, that mystery bias I told you about earlier, if you think that you know a lot about biases, you're more likely to fall for a bias. Go figure. And the very, very last thing I want to show you is this tool that I've been taught at uni. I've kind of used it in my work and different workshops. It's not the point of today, so I'm going to skip over it pretty quickly, but it's called the Fishbone Diagram, and it's used widely in product design, manufacturing, technology, all sorts of fields. And you know that old kind of method of asking the 5 whys to get to the root cause? It's essentially that, but with more structure. You have this fish head, which is the problem, and you have all the different areas of the business, or parts of the problem, like people, tools, technology, processes, for example. And then you ask the 5 whys with that. There's a couple of sources for you that if you want to read more about these biases, and there's some books as well, feel free to do that. I'll send the deck to Darren, I think, and then he can send it out to everyone. And that's essentially it. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed my stories.